lakehouse to the full content except the access governance and the shortcut authentication aspect. But one aspect that is common across most of the components that you would see in Fabric as and when we create is, one is whether it supports Git integration or not. Now you all can see, correct? This is in uncommitted state, meaning Lakehouse does support syncing your Lakehouse into the corresponding repository that you have synced. And since it's not synced, it's showing as uncommitted. If I click on source control, I can select all which I want to sync and I can commit it. So now the changes of the Lakehouse are getting synced into the corresponding Git repository. But does it mean that all the data also is getting synced into the Lakehouse, or is it just the underlying structure? Any guess what it would be? Team, let's be vocal on this. So I can see that my organization is DataSharks Education. Under that, I have Microsoft Fabric as the project. Within that, I am mapping it to the Git repository that is Power BI. And in that, it is under the folder DevOps Git integration. And now I can see that Lakehouse 1. Correct. I am able to see shortcuts metadata, the Lakehouse metadata, and the corresponding aspect. So now also the semantic model that I had created, the new semantic model, that also gets synchronized. And I'm able to see the versions and the definitions that are present within the same. So model.tmdl provides me the different model versions, what exactly it is following. And you can see that even semantic model supports collation. So it's binary to UTF-8 because the underlying source of that is Lakehouse itself. And I can see which tables have been synchronized into that semantic model. It is the structured duplicate table 1 and the view 1. So we see that Lakehouse does support Git integration. The semantic model that we build along with the Lakehouse, the new semantic model also gets synced into the corresponding Lakehouse. Sorry, into the corresponding Git repository. Now, where is my view definition? The SQL Analytics endpoint. Is the SQL Analytics endpoint also synchronized within the Azure DevOps Git repository? I leave that as a question to you all to validate whether whenever I synchronize this chain, does that mean these two also got synchronized or not? So do go and identify, because we all created views within the SQL Analytics endpoint. Is that view being synchronized anywhere into the Git repository directly based on this functionality, or do I have to use the SQL database project that I downloaded and integrate it manually within the DevOps as a part of my code base recovery aspect? That's one aspect that I leave on to you all as a part of your case study for today, because anyhow, I have told you all to explore certain aspect of SQL Analytics endpoint as part of yesterday's case study, correct? So in that SQL Analytics endpoint, create a view and then try to synchronize or sync the change from your workspace to your corresponding repository that you all had already integrated as a part of your earlier case studies, and check whether that view definition is present anywhere within your Git repository or not. Clear? So we saw that Lakehouse as a component and the semantic model as a component in Fabric does support Git integration. And those are supported, meaning. Now, one final aspect before we move to Fabric warehouses. Can you see the concept of owner here? What does the owner here represent? Owner here represents that in case if an account, meaning whoever created that component for the first time becomes the owner of that component. Since I created this component via this account whose full name is, whose display name is Nandan Hegde, I am able to see the owner as Nandan Hegde. Now imagine that in case if I move out of the organization, my account would get disabled. And if my account get disabled, what happens is the Lakehouse stops working because the Lakehouse has been configured via account, which is the owner. And if my account gets disabled, the overall Lakehouse gets disabled. Is that a good security model or design? Unfortunately, no. For that, there is a concept called takeover. Meaning, imagine that the DataSharks account that I use is moving out of the organization. So that account would get disabled. So in that case, what I can do is I can log into via another account that has at least contributor or more access within the workspace. And I can leverage that account to take over the ownership from the original account that is getting disabled to the new account. What does that mean? So now I am logged in via the user account 2, which is takeover account. And if I click on the ellipsis and under settings, you can see the details about this Lakehouse. The Lakehouse name is Lake, but can you see? It's owned by Nandan Hegde, created and last modified by Nandan Hegde, and I can take over. So now once I take over this, when you take over the settings, your credentials will be utilized for all the data sources used by this item. What does this mean? All the data sources utilized by this item. Correct? We'll come to that a little later. So are you sure you want to take the ownership? So let's take over. So once I take over, now it is owned by takeover. Now, in case if I go and refresh this page, and I am via user 1, I can see that now the Lakehouse 1 settings, it's still showing me owned by Nandan Hegde. Why? Because remember which workspace I am. I am in optimization. So I have to go to the optimization workspace. And there check for this lake, which was Nandan Hegde, has now been taken over by this takeover account. Now, in case if I log into this Lakehouse, I can able to see all the data as of now. Yes or no? The data is getting loaded.
Yes.
Because both the accounts are now active and have the right ownership. Any account with contributor and above would have the ability to take over the existing items or take over the ownership of that item. Since the takeover account had a contributor access, it was able to take over the entire responsibility of this corresponding Lakehouse. Now let me go to the Active Directory and disable that account temporarily. And let's check the implications of that disablement. Now, parallelly, let me open the SQL Analytics endpoint for the same. So I am going into the SQL Analytics endpoint as well. And let me execute a query called select all from dbo.test. Select all from dbo.test. I'm able to see the data. Now let me go to my Microsoft Entra ID under users. Let me go and check the takeover user. And let me disable it. So there is an option wherein I can disable that user. It's under.
Here only it was Nandan down below.
Sorry, I was not able to see edit. It was below, correct?
On that same. Scroll down, I think it was there.
Account. Yes, I'll disable this. Correct. Now I'll save this. So now I can see that this account has been disabled. Correct. Let me try refreshing it again and check whether the account is disabled. Now, to validate whether my account is enabled or disabled, let me log into app.powerbi.com. Okay, I'm still able to log in. But this was the cache aspect. To complete your request, we need you to authenticate yourself again. So if I continue, it's asking me to, your account has been locked because I have disabled that account. Correct? So now temporarily, this states that I'm unable to log in, meaning my account has been disabled. Now let me go to the Lakehouse. Since now the Lakehouse has been taken over by the disabled account, or to be more specific, the owner of that Lakehouse is the disabled account. Let's test some aspect. Okay. I'm still able to do this. And I'm still able to see the data. So is there any benefit of taking over? Or we can keep it as is as well. Or was it the cache that was being shown across? Any thoughts?
Cache. Ideally, you should not be able to see.
Okay. So if that is the case, let me close all my tabs. Let me log into app.powerbi.com again. Correct? Explicitly. So now the cache is lost. Agree? So now it's logging into app.powerbi.com. Now let me go to the optimization workspace. Here I can see that takeover is the account. That is the owner of the SQL Analytics endpoint and the Lakehouse. Correct? Let me go to the SQL Analytics endpoint now. New SQL query. And let me execute it. Select all from test. I am able to see the data. And then if I click on the Lakehouse, I am able to see the underlying data as well. So, Shweta, you are partially correct prior. What used to happen is earlier, a couple of months back, in case whenever the user left the organization or his account got disabled, at that time the lakehouse was not accessible. And earlier there was no way for anyone to take over this. For that, the only way was for us to reach out to Microsoft product team or Microsoft support team, and they could change over the ownership from their backend system. But now it's couple of months that Microsoft has provided this functionality wherein I can take over from from other accounts, and then it does continue to function. But there's some catch corresponding to that. If you all remember, while taking over, there was an option, correct? Or a warning came in that all credentials would start working from this account, correct? What are those credentials about? So everything is falling under the concept of that authentication that we have been discussing since last couple of times, correct? Authentication on shortcuts of files, of tables within internal system, and files and table of shortcut with external sources, and while taking over. So what is this authentication about? I like you all to give some thought behind it, try to research in next few days, and post that we'll discuss in detail about different scenarios of authentication and authorization. But do remember that not all components work properly. Certain components that we would see eventually, for every component, we would see this concept of takeover and this account enablement and disablement. We'll see that certain components fail to function as expected. So at that time, one has to take over from the corresponding object to the corresponding ownership for the object or for that item to work properly in future. So unfortunately, this is a manual effort or manual aspect that has to be done, which Microsoft is working on for better enablement aspect. But as of today, there is no fixed timeline as to when would this manual takeover concept be removed by Microsoft. So that does add a dependency at an organization level wherein there would be some person who has initially created those objects, correct? So he or she would be the owner of those objects. So in case if he or she leaves the organization or his account gets disabled, then someone among the organization should have to take over that again. Else, certain components start failing. So any queries up till now on the concept of what takeover is? Takeover is basically taking over the ownership of that corresponding object that we have created. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'll take it over again to my corresponding account. So I'll take over. And now I have successfully taken over. Now, of course, let me enable back that account. So now the account has been enabled back again. So any queries in the lakehouse aspect? If no, then let's move to the concept of Fabric Warehouse. So we all saw that Lakehouse is the data lake equivalent of Fabric ecosystem. And those who are familiar with Azure Blob Storage or Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 can consider Lakehouse as the SaaS equivalent of those PaaS objects that Microsoft provides. Now, those who have experience in Azure Synapse Workspace, there is a component called Synapse Serverless Pool. Now, the Synapse Serverless Pool equivalent in Microsoft Fabric ecosystem is what we call as Microsoft Fabric Warehouse. So the Fabric Warehouse is an OLAP system that Microsoft provides for managing all the historical data and for analytical purposes, not transactional purposes. So in order to have a warehouse, under new item, there is an option called warehouse. Now you can create a blank warehouse, blank meaning it won't contain anything, or you can contain a warehouse with some sample data provided. I already have a warehouse created. Let me check whether it's a blank warehouse or a sample warehouse. So the warehouse that I created is a sample warehouse. If you click on sample warehouse, it would automatically populate these tables like date, geography, etc. Any queries up till now on what Fabric Warehouse? So Fabric Warehouse is a structured database that Microsoft provides for analytical purposes. So it's an OLAP database that Microsoft provides in the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. Now, in Microsoft Fabric Warehouse, also the underlying data is in the format of Delta Parquet file itself. So all the tables that are present here, the underlying data is in the form of Delta Parquet file format itself. Now, in case if I click on this ellipsis, I cannot see view files, unlike in the Lakehouse table section wherein I was able to see the underlying files in the Delta Parquet itself. But when I click on the warehouse tables, I do not get that property of viewing the underlying files. So then, on what basis can I state that the underlying data is in the form of Delta Parquet itself? Should I just blatantly trust what Microsoft has said? Ideally, I'll say yes. If Microsoft has documented, you have to trust that it's the underlying file format. But if you all remember what I stated, that Fabric Warehouse, Lakehouse, in case if their underlying file format is Delta Parquet, meaning it is being preserved in the OneLake, and OneLake as a whole is an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2 itself. Correct? So one can access the Fabric Warehouse or the Lakehouse via a tool called Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer or OneLake Explorer. Both are two different components, correct? There is a component called Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. It's a free software that you can download from internet and install on your local system itself. There is no payment associated with that. So Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer is one way how you can access Azure Blob Storage, Azure Data Lake Storage, etc. of cloud. So if you see, I have logged in via my DataSharks account, and that account has access to some subscriptions. So by default, the subscriptions and the resource group associated with this account are visible here. And you saw, correct? Under Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, I created a storage account called Delete Storage Account Demo. I can access that storage account from here. Under storage account, there was called as container, and we had created a container called shortcut. So if I click on the shortcut container, I can see the corresponding files that are associated within that container. I can see that there are 3 files that are present: book1, XLSX, Parquet, and JSON file. Similarly, since the underlying storage of OneLake is Azure Data Lake Storage Gen2, I can access the corresponding Lakehouse and the Fabric Warehouse from the Storage Explorer. Now let's try it out. So Apologies. Let me go to the lake house. Now, how to connect to this lake house? So under the lake house, there is something called as properties, correct? So for every component, there is a property associated. So let me copy this URL. Now, then click on the connect open connect dialog. Here it is asking me to connect to a Azure Data Lake Storage, Gen2 container or directory. And since we know the underlying is Azure Data Lake Storage, I'll connect it. And it is asking me to sign. So I'll connect it via my personal the account that is DataSharks that has access to that lakehouse. Now it is asking me to provide the directory URL. And this is the URL, correct? This is the URL. Within that, I'm asking optimization is my workspace. Within that workspace, the object name dot object type, that is lake, is the object name, and it is a lake house, and under that the file section. So lake house, and I'll click on next, and I'll click on connect. So now I can go and access the underlying data from the lake house from the Azure Storage Explorer. As of now, we are seeing the lake house, correct? Now, if you see, I'm able to see the file section of the lake house because I provided the path of the file section. Now, can I go to the underlying files? I can see all the files. Now, I can even download the files. So, it is asking me where to download, and I'll select the folder and I'll download it in that corresponding section. Now, unlike the Fabric portal, where one could not, as you can see, I am getting a conflict while downloading the file. I'll overwrite it, the file, because in my download location, that file already exists. So now, unlike the Fabric portal, wherein I could not download the file but just upload the file, via the Storage Explorer, I can even download the files that are present. So one of the feedback that most of the folks are providing to Microsoft is enable that download property from the portal as well. But we do not know what is the timeline by when, or even if Microsoft is planning to incorporate that feature or functionality. So at any point of the time, if there is a need for you all to download the files that are present within the lakehouse, not only does that mean only in the file section? No, even the underlying tables files, the Parquet files, you can connect to the storage lakehouse via the Storage Explorer and then parse across those files. Now let me go to the lakehouse. Can you see? I am now part of tables files. I can go to the table sections as well. In table section, I have test1 file or test1. This represents the shortcuts. The log symbol represents these are shortcuts. But in my lakehouse, I had a original table called test, correct? I can go to that test and I can download the underlying Parquet file as well. Which is not supported in the normal portal way. So I was able, and the download has been completed. So I was able to access the lakehouse via the Azure Storage Explorer. Now let's try to access the Fabric warehouse also via Storage Explorer. So for that, first I have to get the URL. But to get that URL, I can go to the properties section and I can copy the URL. Now let me try to connect it again, wherein Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, I'll authenticate via my account and then I'll provide this URL. Now, rather than the specific geography, I'll map it to the table section. If you see, every time, does it mean I have to go to the corresponding table and get that URL? No. It follows the generic concept of https onelake.dfs.fabric.microsoft.com/ then the workspace name / the object name. If you see, my object name is warehouse itself that I have provided. Dot object type and which section do you want? So now Fabric warehouse. So within the Fabric warehouse table section, I can go to overall warehouse as well. There it would provide me all the other aspects like audits, etc. that you all can explore in your spare time. Under DBO, I have these many entities that we saw, correct? I have a date table, geography table, medallion table, etc. So now in case if I click on date table, I can see the underlying Delta and Parquet file that are present. Can you all see the Parquet file? This concludes or proves us that the data in the Fabric warehouse, underlying data is being preserved in the form of Delta Parquet file itself. And hence one can explore it via the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. So now I can go across each and every entity and check its corresponding log file and transaction files. Correct. I can check the corresponding files that I have and even can download it. So any queries? Yes or no?
No, Nandan.
So Nandan, why we
Okay.
can't see this Delta Parquet file in the warehouse side?
Why can't we see? Unfortunately, it's Microsoft, correct? Microsoft might have created. We do not have the reasoning behind that. As to why didn't Microsoft enable that? As I said, there are multiple aspects. Like why can't we download the files from the Fabric portal? Whereas why are we able to download it? It's what Microsoft has designed. For that, even we won't have any answer to that. Clear?
Yes.
It's Microsoft design. Now we do not know whether it was intentional or unintentional. Is it a bug? Unfortunately, we do not know that aspect and we cannot comment on that. Clear?
Yes.
So any queries before we move ahead? So we identified that in a Fabric warehouse, the underlying data is being preserved in the form of Delta Parquet itself, and one can access those Parquet file by connecting to that Fabric warehouse via the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer component. Similar to Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer component, there is a component called OneLake Explorer, a software, correct? That also you all can install it and access it. That in case if time permits, we will see eventually at one point of the time. Else, I expect you all to see it in your spare time or in your own time itself, I'll say. Because the overall concept remains the same. You would be able to see the underlying data itself, be it from the Storage Explorer or be it from the OneLake Explorer. Sorry. So now, whenever we create any Fabric warehouse, corresponding warehouse, a corresponding semantic model gets created. This is the default semantic model, similar to how in the Lakehouse we had a default semantic model, correct? For warehouse also, the default semantic model gets created, which can be leveraged by our data analytical team for building Power BI reports, or who are familiar with data analytical expressions for analysis aspect. So now, why am I not seeing the SQL analytics endpoint here? Because Fabric Warehouse itself is your SQL system itself, correct? I can directly execute queries on the warehouse front-end view itself. Hence, there is no need of me to create a SQL analytics endpoint. Unlike Lakehouse, wherein its front-end view was to upload files, etc., that I could not have executed any SQL queries. But since Microsoft wanted to create a one tool that would be beneficial for everyone, even those who are familiar with SQL can do the analysis rather than coding, Microsoft created that SQL analytics endpoint for the Lakehouse. But Fabric Warehouse itself is your SQL structure, wherein the only is to execute SQL queries only. Hence, there is no need of creating a SQL analytic endpoint. Any queries? But a semantic model is created by default because semantic model can be used by the data analytical team via DAX or Power BI aspect. So any queries? Now, within Fabric Warehouse, let's understand each and every aspects. Isn't this framework similar to what we saw for the SQL analytics endpoint of the Lakehouse? The answer to that is yes. So basically you have the SQL endpoint, meaning, what do I mean by the SQL endpoint? It is basically the server name that is hosting this warehouse. Then I have tags that I can associate this warehouse with. Copilot, since my workspace is in trial capacity, the Copilot is not available for this, but we would eventually take a look with respect to the Copilot at the end. Then the default Power BI semantic model, similar to the Lakehouse aspect. There is one additional concept called restore point. What can anyone state me what does restore point here signify?
Restore the old data again.
No, what is this restore point?
It is like a baseline for later on coming back to that particular data state.
But you all stated, everyone stated different aspect, but what is the base use of this?
Rollback.
Rollback. Yeah.
Meaning database backup. Correct. So basically, Microsoft is automatically creating backups of my corresponding Fabric warehouse in the form of restore points. Correct. So, and you can see restore point allows you to restore the warehouse to a previous version. This system creates a restore point at least every 8 hours. And I can also create my restore point in time now. Automatically it creates 8 hours, but now I can create a restore point in time underscore restore point, and I can create it. So these restore points were system created, and now I explicitly created a restore point, which is user defined restore point, and it was added by me, this restore point. Now, for how many days does a restore point remain? There is a default retention period associated with the restore points that you would cover eventually in the subsequent aspects of optimization. Every storage system has its own optimization, enhancements, etc. Correct? So once we discuss on that aspect, we'll cover the retention for these restore points. Because imagine if every 8 hours, if your database is 1 TB, every 8 hours I'm creating restore points. Correct? If there is no retention period, it would choke up my storage aspect. Correct? And then it states that I can restore the Fabric warehouse as well from that restore point. So if I click on restore, restoring the warehouse will replace the current schema, queries, and model layouts, cancel active queries. You all can read this, go through this statement. So basically what it is stating that I have to acknowledge this and I have to click on restore. Unfortunately, the problem is the restore point. Let's say that I created there are restore points that were created, let's say 8 hours ago. I want to restore there was some major issue that transpired within the Fabric warehouse, because of which multiple data got corrupted across multiple tables. And it is becoming very difficult for me to identify in which all tables my data got corrupted. Correct? So at that time, I want to restore my data warehouse to an original point, that is clean warehouse. So at that time, I can leverage this. But the problem here is, rather than allowing the users with the ability to create a new Fabric warehouse via the restore point and do the comparison between your production warehouse and this restore newly created, Microsoft does not provide that flexibility. Via the restore point, it restores the corresponding warehouse itself, meaning it is overriding the existing warehouse itself rather than allowing the option to create a new warehouse. So imagine in that 8 hours of time, there were some deployments that transpired. Or there were some deployments that transpired. Or there was some data that was successfully loaded. But there were some tables that got corrupted that we want to revert back. But unfortunately, with this restore point, what happens is the data warehouse comes to the state that it was 8 hours back. So all the deployments that happened, all the successful loads that happened have to be done again. So there are requests from the users that rather than overriding the existing table itself or existing warehouse itself, give the flexibility to restore this restore point as a separate warehouse in itself, so that users can then do a comparison and do the necessary sync up from one warehouse to another and then get rid of the old warehouse or the new warehouse, whatever is the ask that the user needs. Hence, since the restore point is restoring the warehouse to that point in itself and overriding the existing warehouse itself, then all the changes are being overridden in that aspect. Any queries on the restore point aspect? And we'll take a example of the restore point in next session once we actually make some changes, or let's do it now itself. Correct? So let me go to the SQL query. Let me execute truncate table date. So now I truncated the table and let me execute select all from date table. Now in case if I execute this, I'm saying there is no data present here. Correct? Now remember, there is a concept called time travel in the Fabric warehouse as well that I stated, correct? For a single table, there is no need for me to restore the warehouse. I can use the concept of time travel that we'll discuss eventually. But just for you all to understand, imagine if such truncation would have happened across mass tables, correct? So in that case, one way for me is directly go to the settings. Now, under restore points, since I restored it, this was the latest restore point, correct? Let me restore it back to that point itself. So now the warehouse is getting overridden with that restore point that contains all the data.
And then this is the full backup every time, right?
Full backup. So now if I execute this, I'll be able to see the date table data because I restored it to that point in the time based on the restore point itself. But could I have also done it via as of timestamp, etc.? That will take a look with respect to when we actually come into the concept of time travel. So we saw the concept of restore point. Now restore point helps us go back in time at the overall database level, whereas time travel is entity by entity level. So now let me go to the concept of time travel. The time travel concept remains the same. Why? Because the underlying data in the Fabric warehouse is also in the form of Delta Parquet itself. Correct? Now, one can execute SQL queries on the Fabric warehouse, or one can also leverage a notebook to execute the SQL queries. And in this notebook, it is not Python or PySpark, etc. Let me go to the Fabric warehouse. Now, if you see, I have a notebook here. Correct. In the notebook, I have an option to mount the warehouse. So I can mount multiple warehouses and execute queries corresponding to that warehouse. In this case, it is using a kernel session, meaning underlying some engine to execute these queries. But can you see here? T-SQL, only T-SQL is supported. If you use this version of the notebook, what I mean is, under notebook section, there is Spark, there is Python notebook, meaning Spark notebooks, Python notebooks, and T-SQL Analytics notebook. Yesterday, the notebook that we saw was the Spark notebook. Now we are seeing the T-SQL version notebook. Now here I can execute normal SQL queries that I can execute in the SQL query as well. Meaning, if I execute this query here, it's one and the same. The same query I can execute here as well via notebooks. So now this session is getting initiated, so it will take a couple of minutes. Now, let me create a table called time travel. Now it states that there is already an object named time travel. So let me drop that table. Drop table dbo.time travel. So now let me go ahead and create that table again. Now let me insert certain data into that table. Now let me get the timestamp as of this aspect. Now let me insert the data again into the table. Now, in case if I execute select all from dbo.time travel, I'm getting 4 rows because I have inserted the data 2 times, and every time I'm inserting 2 rows. Now, if I want to time travel back, I need to get the timestamp as of what was the state as of that time, particular time. Correct. So in case if I execute this, I can see that the data as of the time was 2 rows. Post this time only, I executed this additional 2 rows. So the syntax of time travel remains the same as of that timestamp. But unlike, okay, any queries up till now on the concept of time travel? And similarly, I can restore the data as of that aspect. So imagine that. Let me execute truncate table. Correct now. Now let me execute here. Select all from dbo.date table. So this would provide me the data that is present in the date table. Correct. Now let me get the corresponding timestamp. Now let me truncate the table. Truncate table dbo.date. So now let me execute time travel now. Select all from dbo.date for timestamp as of. It can be any time. As of that time, the data was present. So now I can see that I can restore the data of the date table via time travel to that instance. How I can do? Select all or create a table backup as you will understand what clone is later, correct? As of that timestamp, or select all into. Meaning I can copy this data as of that particular timestamp and restore the data into the table. Hence, then what is the benefit of time restore point in case if there is a time travel enabled? Remember, in case if I drop a table, I can nowhere go back via time travel. Correct? So if I delete table, if I do any data changes at the table level, I can restore it back via the concept of time travel. But what if I drop a table completely? Then the way for you is leverage the restore point. But the problem is the restore point overrides the existing warehouse. So all the delta changes that have transpired from the current time that you are restoring to the last restore point time, those changes would have been lost in your current warehouse. So then you will have to explicitly try to recreate those based on the corresponding sequence of events. Or, as I said, time travel is beneficial when you know which all entities have been corrupted and you want to go back in time for that. But imagine that in a warehouse that contains millions of entities and you do not know mass corruption occurred, do not know in which entities there are problems. The most easy ways than identifying every table and doing a time travel back to that entity, better override the entire restore point itself. Understood the difference between the restore point and the time travel aspect? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So Nandan, that is the biggest drawback, right? Then
Hence, feedback has or idea has been provided based on the number of votes that it would get. Microsoft may think of taking that as an aspect, but that's a problem as of now. Yes. Clear?
Nandan, one question: is there any option like the differential backup?
We don't have any control on that. As of now, everything is being governed by Microsoft only, and we do not know how they are doing it. It's a full backup only.
Okay.
Correct? Now, unlike the Lakehouse that did support describe tree, correct? Microsoft Fabric Warehouse does not support this syntax. You cannot check the history from that statement that Microsoft Lakehouse provided us. Correct? And then we saw that you can restore, select all from that table timestamp as of. Correct? Select all from that table option for timestamp as of. So can I replace this timestamp as of with version as of in Fabric Warehouse? Any thoughts?
No,
Sorry,
no, I think.
version as of. Can you see here the syntactical aspect, correct? Version as of. Version is a keyword that is supported in the Lakehouse SQL and XML, but it's not a keyword that is supported in Microsoft Fabric Warehouse. Hence, one can only time travel via the syntax, that is timestamp as of. Unlike Lakehouse that had both options of timestamp and version, here it's only timestamp, because version is not a keyword that is supported by Fabric Warehouse. So we saw that it is possible to time travel in the Fabric Warehouse as well, but it only supports via timestamp and no versioning aspect. Clear? Now you can load data into the Fabric Warehouse via the SQL point as well, meaning you also, right? I was able to manipulate the data. I was able to truncate the data, or I can even update the table. Update date. Update date table. Set date equal to give me a minute. Okay, let me execute time travel table. This would be easier. Update time travel table. Set C1 equal to 5, where C2 equal to 1. So I can update, manipulate, create tables. Correct. Create table dbo.test create C1 integer. I can create tables within the warehouse. I can create or update or manipulate the data via the SQL endpoint of the Fabric Warehouse, because and Fabric itself is a structured database. Hence, I can do anything from the SQL Analytics endpoint of the Fabric Warehouse. I can execute any SQL queries that are supported by the Fabric Warehouse. So any till now. Then similarly, you can also load the data into Fabric Warehouse via the 3 main ingredients that we have, that is notebooks, data flow Gen 2 and data pipelines that we would cover in the next subsequent sessions. Then query activity is similar to what we had seen in the SQL Analytics endpoint of the Lakehouse. It provides me all the queries that have been executed by whom, which queries were long running queries and the frequently running queries. And for the corresponding, this is the front end view aspect. There are some inbuilt tables as well that do provide those metadata. Information and schema dot. So there are some insight tables as well that help us provide us those data like query insights, execution request history, long running queries. So if I execute these queries, I'll be able to get the data that is similar to what I'm getting in the query activity window. Similar concept of model layout. Model layout is with respect to creating the relationships, etc., that one can create within the Fabric, within the warehouse itself. Then download SQL project file is similar to the DACPack file that we created for the SQL Analytics endpoint as well. And everything is similar in the home aspect. Then comes reporting aspect, the same aspect, wherein you can manage the default semantic model, or you can create a new semantic model for the same. Then comes management. Management is wherein I can create the new warehouse snapshot. Now in this, a warehouse snapshot captures your warehouse at its current state or any state from the past dates. So in the create restore point, what is the difference between create restore point and new warehouse snapshot? Correct. So let's create a warehouse snapshot name as WH_snapshot. And then I can choose the snapshot within the past 30 days, wherein I can provide that I want the snapshot as of Monday. And I create it. So what exactly is happening in this scenario? It created a warehouse snapshot. What does that mean?
Whatever the data is there, right? Till Monday, right? It will capture that.
As of Monday. It is snapshot as of Monday because restore points are limited, correct, to specific retention period. But imagine that in the last 30 days, you remember that you want to analyze certain table that got dropped. Restore points have been cleaned up. So at that time, you can create a warehouse snapshot. What it does is it creates a new warehouse as of that time. So there are 3 ways how you can backtrack your data. First is via time travel. Via time travel, you can go to the individual entities and time travel based back on the timestamp. Restore point, what it does is, as of what restore point we have, we can restore the warehouse completely, meaning override the warehouse completely with that version of the data. Then there is something called as warehouse snapshot, wherein you can create a new warehouse as of that particular time period from today till past 30 days. And then it as a separate warehouse and do the comparison between your existing warehouse, production warehouse, and your snapshot warehouse. So 3 ways Microsoft Fabric Warehouse provides recovering some past failures. Restore points are limited to specific retention period, but it overrides the entire production warehouse to that instance itself. Whereas warehouse snapshot is like you are creating a separate warehouse itself. So what I can do is I can create a snapshot, then copy that data from this snapshot into the production warehouse from some other tools and technologies. But if I want to restore the whole warehouse blatantly, I can use the restore point. So there are three ways how you can recover back or restore some aspects in Fabric Warehouse. One is via snapshot, another is via time travel, another is via restore points. Any queries?
This cost of snapshot will also get added, right?
Cost has a trinity cycle, correct? When you say cost, which cost are you talking about? The fabric capacity, or do you mean the storage, or do you mean the
Storage of snapshot warehouse.
okay? For that, I discuss on that aspect once we discuss some property called clone table of tables,
Okay.
correct? For now, keep that question on hold.
Mm-hmm.
You see, there's a question called clone table, correct? So on that aspect, I'll discuss what the snapshot and other aspects and whether there's any actually storage cost involved or not. So in the Fabric Warehouse, we covered the ways to recover data in the Fabric Warehouse, which include time travel, restore point, and snapshot. We saw that a default semantic model gets created, and the underlying data of the Fabric Warehouse is in the form of Delta Parquet itself. One can create shortcut from the lakehouse referencing to a warehouse. That also we saw today while creating a shortcut. But one cannot create shortcut from Fabric Warehouse to some another source. That is one limitation, wherein Fabric Warehouse does not support the concept of shortcuts. It's the lakehouse that supports the concept of shortcuts. But if that is the case, then then what if I have to do some analysis within the Fabric Warehouse? How to do that? So for that, there is an option wherein, let's take an example that in this lakehouse, this lakehouse and this warehouse are present in the same workspace, correct? And we'll take a look on Monday once on the server concept and the collation and other aspects. But now, what I can do, similar to how we could cross query between two lakehouses that are present in the same workspace that we had seen yesterday, correct? One can query the lakehouse data into the Fabric Warehouse as long as they are in the same workspace. So let me query select all from lake, which is the lakehouse name, dot dbo name dot test. Now from Fabric Warehouse, I can still query the data that is present in the lakehouse as long as they are in the same workspace. Now if you see, let me query the shortcut table, correct? Titanic underscore shortcut. I can even query the shortcuts. So imagine that if you want to connect to some external source, first step is you have to create a shortcut from Lakehouse and then query that shortcut into the Fabric via the Fabric Warehouse. Any queries? Yes or no? If no,
No.
No.
then coming to the final aspect for today's session is the collation. If you all remember, I stated that there are some server level collation, database level collation, and which all collation does the database support. Correct. So now this warehouse is hosted on some server. Let me execute that and check. It's case insensitive collation at the server level. But what is the collation at the database level? It's binary, meaning case sensitive and accent sensitive. So in case if I try to execute, select all from DBO dot date table in small rather than capital D, it would fail, stating that invalid object name DBO date because it's a case sensitive collation database. And this query helps us identify what are the different collations that are supported. It also supports two collation only, similar to the SQL Analytics endpoint. But there is a catch. Unlike SQL Analytics endpoint, wherein I cannot update the collation or I cannot have the feasibility to select the collation of the lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoint while creation, in Fabric Warehouse, once a warehouse is created, I cannot update that collation. Via a concept of REST API, I can create a warehouse with a case insensitive collation as well, meaning I can create a warehouse with this collation as so. We would be taking a look with respect to creating a case insensitive warehouse and then understand the expression level collation in the next session. So this concludes today's session.
Can you repeat the last line via REST API? I mean, can we change the existing collation or we create a copy of that warehouse?
You cannot update the collation of a warehouse once it is created.
Correct, correct.
Via the REST API, you can create a new warehouse with this collation. So it's while creating a warehouse that you can get an option to select this specific collation. That is not present while creating it from the portal, but while creating from REST API, while creating a warehouse from REST API, you can mention which collation that warehouse can be created with. In that, you can provide this as the parameter, and that's what we'll see in the next session. So I'll reiterate again. One cannot update the collation of a warehouse once it gets created. Once it's created, done and dusted there itself. But while creating a warehouse from portal also, you cannot select the collation. When you create a warehouse from the portal, it would create the default collation, which is case sensitive. But there is a REST API and you can trigger and have some coding logic via which you can create a warehouse with case insensitive collation, which is this one. Clear? Or still any confusion?
No, I'm clear.
So this concludes today's session.